Hello, everyone, and welcome to Don't Let Your Change Initiatives Fail. Thank you for being with us today. Dr. John Latham from the Montfort Institute will discuss some very interesting research in the area of high-performing organizations. He studied the behaviors and practices of senior leaders at these firms and how they manage successful change initiatives. This information can help you drive change within your own organization. Today we'll also talk about a new program that helps people just getting started in this area. My name is Ed Powers, and I'll be your moderator today. I'm a volunteer for Colorado Performance Excellence, the state's Baldrige program. It's a nonprofit. It's been around for about 10 years, and its mission is to create a culture of excellence that's pervasive across Colorado. I should also note that this year CPEX is becoming Rocky Mountain Performance Excellence to provide services to even more states out here in the West. In my day job, I'm an executive for a company in Fort Collins called Lifestyle Asset Group. We're a startup with a very unique approach to luxury second home ownership. And like many of you, I'm in the process of applying performance excellence principles in my own business. And I'm always anxious to learn something new. And today we're not going to disappoint in that area. So here's the agenda. Dr. Latham will be sharing his research findings. We'll take a break for some questions, and then I'll be telling you about the new Performance Excellence Incubator program that might be of interest to many of you. We'll also take some final questions at the end and then wrap up. Now, before we get started, let's talk about how you can participate in today's webinar. Right now, you're in listen-only mode on your phone, but please ask questions through the control panel on the right side of your screen. We'll collect these questions and answer them during the Q&A portions of the presentation. Please type in your questions while you think of them so you don't forget to ask, and we'll be ready to answer them when the time comes. Also, there is no need for you to take any notes today. I'll be sending to you via email a copy of the slides, and then we'll also post the recording so that you can refer to that in the future. Now, when you signed up for the program, we actually asked you a couple of questions when you registered for this event. And, excuse me, we thought it might be helpful for you to know a little bit more about the audience in the makeup today. So what's great is we have people participating from all over the state of Colorado, and also hello to our friends in Wyoming, New Mexico, and Texas who are with us today. People are also coming from all different sectors, a lot from business, as you can see here, but we also have some good representation from government, nonprofits, healthcare, education, and that's great because the principles that we're talking about today are universally applicable regardless of what kind of organization you're in today. We also have, if you want to look at the size of the organizations, most attendees are from smaller groups, and for those of you in this category, we ask you to pay very close attention because at the second half of this presentation, there's some information that will be of great interest to you. And finally, we do have some folks that are in different phases of applying performance excellence. We have some that, a lot that are investigating, a lot that have launched some new projects. Again, things that we talk about today are going to be very, very interesting to you. We even have some folks that are performing at the very highest levels now. We're anxious to hear your thoughts and your comments and your questions as well. So as we go through the presentation, we're anxious to learn from you as well. Okay, with that, I'd like to introduce our speaker today. Dr. John Latham is the director of the Montfort Institute, which is part of the Montfort School of Business at the University of Northern Colorado. John brings to the university over 30 years of experience working in and with a variety of commercial, nonprofit, and government organizations in the U.S., Asia, and Europe. He's enjoyed a wide variety of work experiences from management consulting to vice president for a $1.3 billion in vitro diagnostics manufacturer with operations in 40 countries. His work focuses on helping senior executives design and lead strategic change initiatives from strategy to results in three main areas: strategic leadership, execution excellence, and organizational learning. So welcome, John, and thanks for being with us.
Thank you, Ed, for that great kickoff and introduction. The next 25 minutes or so, I'm going to describe a framework for leading sustainable transformation that has been a result of about 20 years experience combined with the last few years of in-depth research projects that we've been working on. Probably should start with defining what is sustainable excellence. And sustainable excellence really has two components. One is changing the systems and the individuals and then getting that embedded in the culture so that the change that you're making is actually sustainable itself. And the other aspect of sustainable excellence is changing those things in a way that creates results across the organization, high-performance results that compare favorably with other organizations and are ever improving, everything from operations and products and services to customers, financials, the workforce, and the community and the environment. And so today we're talking about, transformation that will actually create these kinds of results. Unfortunately, as you know, this is not easy. Change is hard, and the odds are against you. And most of them end up failing. But the good news is there is a group of organizations and leaders that have defied these odds and actually succeeded in creating sustainable excellence. And these are examples run across large manufacturing, large service, small business, healthcare, education, and nonprofits and government. And these organizations, the ones we've looked at, were recipients of the Baldrige Award. And the Monmouth College of Business, as a recipient of the Baldrige Award, is part of a Baldrige Award recipient consortium to continue learning and improving organizations. And it's from that group we conducted a recent research project on about 14 CEOs that represented the different sectors. And during that study, we did a deep dive with each CEO to find out why they started this journey, how they led it, what they learned along the way, what challenges they faced, and how they addressed those challenges. And so our real question was, what can we learn from them, and what method did they use? We were hoping to find 7 things or so that we could tell people to do these things and the transformation will take place. Then we could probably sell a lot of those and make money for the university. But unfortunately, what we found was a bit more complex than that across the board for all 14 of them. And so our conclusion was that this is a little bit more complicated than most popular leadership or business books make it out to be. Now, the good news is we found about 35 different items that interact with each other. But the good news is that really the core of this framework are the 9 leadership behaviors at the top and the 9 approaches at the bottom. These are 2 sides of the same coin and work together. At the same time, as you're changing behaviors and you're changing the approaches in the organization and the system, this interacts with the culture, and the culture tends to change. And this is what actually makes the change sustainable from an internal perspective, is that the culture, it becomes embedded in the culture, and it becomes a values-driven culture. And these are some of the cultural values that were common to the 14 participants in our study. We didn't go looking for individual leadership characteristics because, quite frankly, the research on that has not been very productive and useful. But these leaders did demonstrate some key characteristics that seem to make a difference on the behaviors and the approaches and how they actually led the change. And a little later in the presentation, I'll spend more time on the attitudes and motivations because we actually did an additional study on that. So this is the framework, and in the middle are the forces for change, and all 4 of these are interacting with basically 5 major forces of change. One is the need for positive tension in the organization to overcome the inertia of current performance. The second is dealing with the resistance that is a natural outcome of increasing the tension. And aligning the organization. And one of the CEOs in the study said, if I had to do this differently, I would have aligned and integrated the organization sooner, because that's where the real power was in getting the transformation to be successful. They all use the criteria for performance excellence model from Baldrige, otherwise it wouldn't have been in the study, and the CEOs found that to be a very useful tool to help structure their change along the way. And they all use subject matter experts, both internal and external subject matter experts, to help them navigate this process as we went forward. So that's kind of the big picture, if you will, and the big framework. And so let's dive into the behaviors and talk a little bit more about these 9 behaviors and the 9 approaches. In the middle, the behaviors really start with being a role model. And every leadership book or course on the planet talks about how leaders have to be a role model. In this case, it took on a slightly different dimension in that these leaders actually had to change and become the type of the behaviors and the type of leaders that they wanted others to become. And in fact, in one instance, they had been on this journey of transformation for nearly a year, and the CEO noticed that many of the other senior executives really weren't getting on board. They weren't doing the things he was asking them to do. So he sent out some feelers and got, some trusted agents to find out what was going on. And the message that they brought back was the people said, we'll change when the CEO changes. And so this was a bit of a shock to him because he thought he was a good leader and been there a long time. But he realized through reflection that, he was a product of that culture and that organization for 20 plus years. And he too needed to transform to be a credible leader. Otherwise, it was very difficult to overcome the resistance. They all demonstrated and talked about a high degree of respect for people at all levels. And this was critical to developing trust within the organization, which is needed for teamwork and working across functional boundaries and actually improving the overall enterprise system. And respect for people also was essential for their collaborative approach that they took. These were leaders that were very confident, but they were also humble in the sense that they didn't think they had all the answers. But they had lots of ideas and advocated those ideas. So they used a diverse team and this helped out the transformation in 2 ways. One, they came up with better solutions because they had more people involved in an effective process to collaborate. And number 2, resistance to change was next. They had more ownership in the implementation. All of this required frank 2-way communication amongst so that they could actually dig in and solve these issues and redesign the processes within the organization to be higher performing. And in addition to that, the leaders were always pushing the message of and what progress they had made and where they needed to go, and clear focus for the immediate future and what they needed to do. And they used every opportunity to keep reinforcing that, which required quite a bit of persistence and tenacity on the part. There were a few of them that expressed some doubt during this process and during this journey. Not doubt that they were doing the right thing, doubt that they'd ever really accomplish it and get the organization to change. But they never told anybody, and they never blinked. They just kept going. And part of that was holding people accountable for actually making the changes, demonstrating the values of the organization and the behaviors. And while they gave them every chance to make the change and coach them and gave them the tools and training, at the end, if people couldn't make the change, they eventually had to change the people and let them go. It was interesting that through the discussions, they talked about their organization from a system perspective of highly enabled, trained people, creating great products and services and experience for customers, creating really satisfied customers that were delighted, came back and spent more money, repeat business, brought their friends with them, referral business, and that ultimately was made the investors happy and created more financial results. Along the way, there were a few self-proclaimed introverts in this group that they really would have liked to have led transformation from behind their desk. But as one of them said, that's just not possible, he discovered. And so even the introverts had a structured approach that scheduled their time to make sure they went out and spent time with the workforce, suppliers and partners, customers, the variety of stakeholders in the organization, and they just had a systematic approach to make that happen. And ultimately, they spent a lot of time learning and reflecting and learning on the experiences they had along the way, which helped them transform, and they became different along the way. The gray matter got greater, the groups got deeper, and they eventually could evolve to become back to that role model leader and become what they were looking these are 9 that interact with each other and support each other. Individually, these are all found in other research projects. I think in this case, it was the package and how these 9 work together that was important and powerful for their successful journey. But this is just one side of the coin. The other side of the coin is what did they actually do? What activities were they involved in, and what did they do? And that's where the 9 approaches come in, or as we call it, the behaviors are kind of the art of leading change. This is more of the science of having structured approaches that are explicit to understand the stakeholders and what are they need and the relationship with them. And with that understanding, that informed the compelling directive, as a few of them called it, which was really their desired reality. What did they want the organization to be? What was the mission, business values? What are our core competencies? And ultimately, this had to give meaning and purpose to the people in the organization. But the question becomes, okay, how do we accomplish this? By what method? And so they created and developed a focused strategy, had a systematic approach to set priorities. And this, the important point here was that they all emphasized the need for focus. Focus on the short-term wins and things that they can accomplish and that will move them along, as opposed to a shotgun approach and let's try to improve everything at once. That strategy led to a strategy of enabling, empowering, and engaging the workforce. Everything from how do we, who do we hire, and what type of people do we hire, how do we develop them, involve them, engage them, and how do we address the whole person in this process? Because work ultimately is personal, and the people ultimately are the ones that change and transform the organization. And they talked a lot about deploying and execution and the follow-through, because in a recent study a few years ago, the CEOs in U.S. corporations had over 80% of them said, we're really pretty good at developing strategies. But on the other side, only less than 20% of them said, we're actually good at implementing those strategies. So it seems that keeping these things on track requires constant, good action planning, but constant reinforcement and attention, and following up and measuring that performance. Not only what are the changes we're seeing in the performance of the organization and an enterprise-wide scorecard, but what's the progress of the individual initiative from a project perspective, and how are they moving forward? And they found that if they didn't ask for this information, didn't have people report back on progress and the performance changes, that it just didn't get done. And so some of them set the vision, set the strategy, worked with people and said, go do it. And what they found a little while later is that no, this is really doing it, because they were too busy running the business as opposed to changing the business. And what they really needed was a balance between those two things, where people spent time running the business, but also spent some time changing the business. And that really comes out of the performance review and taking a fact-based approach to understanding performance and progress, and being able to have a dialogue around that. What's working, what's not working, and what on track. What seems to be back on track. Ultimately, the results of these performance reviews ended up driving what they did from a reinforcing behavior perspective, so that people would know that this is the right thing to do, or this is not an effective thing to do. And that included everything from being personally involved in recognizing and rewarding people, to also the promotion, because they realized along the way that they were asking them to demonstrate certain values, do certain things. And if they promoted somebody that by their old definition of success was a high performer, but was not consistent with where they were going and what they were doing, they lost credibility. And so while they could say this is the focus and these are the expectations, if they just follow it up with their actions, including who gets promoted, and people realize really quickly what really is important. And ultimately, as I noted before, they did have to remove a few people along the way. And it was interesting to us that all of them had at least 4 structured, systematic approaches to organizational learning. And the first, the strategic management cycle itself, of developing the strategy, implementing the strategy, measuring the changes, and then adjusting that strategy, was in itself a learning cycle to accomplish the And they as well use the Baldrige approach because that's how they got in the study. But all of them, to some extent or another, have some kind of benchmarking approach, all the way from fairly informal studying other organizations and how they did it to very formal processes, depending on the organization type. And they all had some form of continuous improvement going on within the organization. There was Six Sigma Lean or whatever. And these 9 approaches, coupled with the 9 behaviors, really form the core of the model, the framework that came out of their stories and how they led it and what they thought was important. Along the way, that set the compelling directive and beyond somewhere better than the current performance measured by the scorecard. So the difference between their current performance and what they really wanted for a vision of the organization created positive tension in the organization. Tension that would help overcome the inertia of I'm pretty happy with the way things are and don't want to change anything. And so that they found along the way, though, that they had to continuously raise the bar because as performance started improving, this journey took them several years to accomplish. But it didn't take several years for performance to start improving. And as performance started improving, they had to keep raising the bar and setting higher and higher goals. Otherwise, the tension would decrease and they wouldn't be pulling the organization. And sometimes the performance would start to flatline. And in some cases of organization, they've actually achieved what they wanted to achieve, took their eye off the ball, and didn't keep setting the goals higher and higher. And ultimately, as the external environment continues to change on them, competitors get better, customers change, and they have internal turnover, they eventually start declining in performance. So there's an old saw that says, this is a journey without an end, and that's truly the case for these folks. Nobody has figured out that we can find. Nobody's figured out a way to get to a point and then sustain that without continuing to improve and setting the bar even higher. Now, along the way, anytime you increase tension, there's some resistance to that tension. And there were a lot of ways to deal with that. One of them was that collaborative behavior and approach that I talked about before. Another one was ultimately, one of the CEOs had a team that several of them did not want to do what they were proposing and thought it was the wrong answer for the organization. And finally, after coaching and working and trying to advocate and trying to get them on board, he finally just said, look, it doesn't work. We'll go back to what's not working now. And so that deflated, they took turned it into more of a positive situation, and they agreed. And they said, okay, we'll do that. We'll go with you. And so ultimately, these forces were changed to help move the organization forward, and they continue to push and try to improve so that they don't decline. We did notice on their attitudes and motivations that the folks we dealt with over the last 20 years and in this research study seem to be different than other effective leaders that we've known and dealt with. And so we decided to do a quantitative follow-up study and do a survey using an instrument called IWAM, Work Attitudes and Motivations, and compare this group to a control group of other effective leaders that weren't doing a Baldrige-based transformation. And what we found is this group was significantly different on 6 factors. First, they had a lower need to actually have sole responsibility for decisions and change. And this is consistent with the collaborative approach that they took that we found. So we found consistency between those two things. The next one is they were more likely to be continuously dissatisfied to a certain extent and wanted to evolve and change and improve the organization, which is part of what I was just talking about, raising the bar and setting the goals further and further. One of them that kind of concerned us at first when we saw it was that they had a higher concentration on the past and using experience to make decisions. Then we looked at the other side of this, and they were also, though, high on focusing on the future and where the organization was going. It's just that it seems that the other effective leaders in the study that weren't using this approach, they also were high and a high focus on the past, which is consistent with our findings on the other side about being highly reflective and learning experience and learning what changed and the effect that change had. When we debriefed them and had a discussion on all of these, their first reaction was they didn't like the fact that the survey showed they were significantly lower on tolerance. In other words, they wanted to impose their rules on others. But as we talked through this, what this ended up being was that they did have a fairly low tolerance for people in the organization that weren't getting on board and didn't have and demonstrate the values of the organization. And ultimately, if we couldn't turn them around, they got rid of them. So at the end of the day, this group had a lower tolerance for that, and that is part of what helps them move forward, because if you leave people in the organization that aren't getting succeed in the organization like others, don't have much credibility as everybody else to say, well, I don't have to do this either. In addition to our finding that they had a strong sense of systems and understanding of how their enterprise worked as an integrated system, they also showed up significantly higher than other effective leaders on being motivated to work with systems and processes and to take a fact-based approach to making decisions and wanting to work with a lot more facts. So this is not a group that would tell their staff to go, develop 3 options and give me 3 options to make a decision on. This is a group of leaders that developed a deep understanding of their organization and how it worked, and actually got into the details of how their enterprise worked. But at the same time, they took a highly collaborative approach and avoided micromanagement. So it's an interesting line that they had to walk. Now, we don't know if they had these 6 attitudes and motives before they started the journey, and this was, was important to that. But we do know that at the end of the journey, which there's really no end, but at the point where we talked to them, they have all developed these attitudes and motives. So, the question is, what did they change, and what in the bigger organization? We've been talking about what leaders had to do and what they were working on, but the entire organization had to redesign and rethink how they do things and develop processes where some didn't exist and improve the ones that did. And with these really grouped into 3 major competencies or areas to work and improve. First was getting better at strategic leadership, understanding the market, being able to meet the market's needs with new and innovative product services and customer experiences. But if they got really good at strategic leadership but couldn't execute, what they found was they got customers excited about new products and services, but when they couldn't execute, they would then have dissatisfied customers. And so they would have sort of this boom bust on a new product offering. So they had, at the same time they were working on getting better at strategic leadership, they had to get better at execution excellence. And the problem here is that if they get really good at execution excellence but weren't good at strategic leadership, they ended up making really great error-free products and services, but unfortunately they were products and services nobody wanted. And so it was really the combination of these two, the guidance system of the strategic leadership combined with really great execution that helped them achieve the high performance that was sustainable. In order, though, to go from fighting fires or responding to ad hoc problems at the bottom of this, all the way up to a world-class aligned and integrated approach, requires that they get really good at organizational learning, and thus the 4 systematic approaches and the leadership behaviors on reflection and learning that were required for them to develop the systems to advance. We can break these down and just we'll cover back a little bit further. There's about 15 major systems that they developed in the organization. There were 5 strategic leadership systems that they worked on and improved along the way. Same with the execution excellence system or the value chain of the organization. And also the enabling systems and processes, including the people, the performance analysis and measurement and knowledge management. So at this point, many people respond and they say, this is pretty daunting. You've presented all these behaviors and all these complicated things. And you asking to improve all these systems. And it does take time. This is a journey that takes most of them many years, and they continue to improve. We haven't found a perfect organization yet, so they continue to work on the organization. And of course, the external environment is always changing, as is the internal environment. But the good news is that it seems daunting, and it is hard work, and it does take time. But the good news is that it is possible. I mean, we know from over 80 examples of organizations and leaders that have done it, that it is possible to lead this kind of transformation. It is possible to, over time, develop high-performing systems to meet and exceed the needs, wants, and desires of multiple stakeholders. And as Amory Lovins is fond of saying at the Rocky Mountain Institute, if it exists, it must be possible. So at this point, people use that, okay, where do I start? How do I get going to do this, regardless of where I am and how good my organization is? And the answer to that from our perspective is to begin with the individual leader and leadership behaviors and learn, what those behaviors are, how good you're doing on those, and start working on self-development. And at the same time, develop a leadership system, explicit, systematic ways to do those 9 activities that we just discussed. And the combination between those behaviors and the systematic approach is really the beginning point of getting the DNA right, getting the senior team on board, getting the organization focused and aligned, and quite frankly, getting the senior leadership team to have credibility because they're doing what they're about to ask the rest of the organization to do. And all of that requires that you have some understanding of the enterprise as a system, not just an org chart of functions, but truly a system view of the enterprise and how it works and the different interactions to create value. And in order to create these systems and improve the systems, requires that you understand the unique organization context, because this isn't a prescriptive approach. These are the areas that need to be developed, but you need to design approaches that fit your unique organization like a glove. And that requires you fully understand what the context is and the desired culture you're looking for in the organization, so that you design these systematic approaches customized for your unique needs and where you're heading in the organization. And this slide and this model is the content of the phase 1 of a excellence incubator that Ed is going to talk to you about after the Q&A session. This is the first stage, and it takes about a year, and it gets the DNA right to have an excellent transformation. So I guess I'll turn it over to questions at this point.
Okay, thank you, John. And I think, Laura, you are looking at what's coming in. Do you have any questions for us that John can answer?
Yeah, we actually have a couple. The first one is we are already doing Lean Six Sigma, and how does it relate to what John has presented in this approach?
That's a great question, because this question comes up all the time. Do I do Lean or Six Sigma, or do I do this type of transformation? And the answer is yes. They're actually compatible approaches. And this approach looks at the larger enterprise as a system. And so it's more of a roadmap and an understanding of the big picture. Lean Six Sigma is a great vehicle for improving processes throughout the organization. And there's systematic approaches. And many of the people in the study have used Lean Six Sigma as their process improvement approach.
Another question, John. Your system reminds me of the guidelines for ISO 26000 and the GRI. Did you use any of their guidelines to develop your system?
We didn't use specifically ISO to develop the system. I think over the last 20 years or so, you've seen the evolution of the Baldrige system, and you've seen the evolution of the ISO system. And they both evolved and I think learned from each other along the way. They do serve different purposes, but they are not inconsistent with each other. And in fact, many of the folks in our study did use ISO as one of their main approaches getting conformity across the organization and in their system. And so it was one of those foundational pieces that many of them used, depending on the industry they were in.
Okay, another one is, I've heard that it's best to get quick wins in order to make people believers. Do you agree? And did companies in your study do that?
Yeah, I'd say the evidence suggests that that's correct. Quick wins do a couple of things, and the organizations in this study did focus on quick wins. If they had a project that was long, they chunked it down into 90 days or less progress goals, things that they could accomplish, deliverables in the project they could accomplish in less than 90 days. Because what most of them found was that if they extended out too much further than that, people would procrastinate and do everything in the last 60 to 90 days anyway. And so they learned to focus and only do a few initiatives at a time, depending on their resources and how large they were. And they learned to chunk those initiatives down to where they could get short-term wins and keep the motivation going. It's very difficult to stay on focus and stay on track and to stay tenacious and on this if you're not seeing any results for a long period of time.
Okay, another question. What leader development process results in these leader behaviors being authentic for the leader versus a checklist to be completed?
That's a great question. Actually, that was part of the motivation for the study. These organizations, along with some other organizations that were all part of this consortium that we worked with, they all had the question, how do we develop a pipeline of leaders that will continue this journey and help us with our succession plan? And what they had realized was that these leaders had figured this out along the way and had learned this along the way. So for these leaders, it was authentic because it had been learned behaviors along the way. Some came to the table with some of the behaviors and some came maybe with all of them. But along the way, they developed and learned themselves, and it was remarkable to us that there was such commonality across the board on what ended up being successful for them to learn. So that was the question: is how do you develop that, systematically or purposely? And I think there's two sides to this: is to take this model, have a unique development program that addresses these issues, and have a continuing learning, development, and coaching system to help leaders develop over time. Because it has to be authentic. Otherwise, there's no credibility. Now, some of them, it originally wasn't authentic, some of these behaviors, but they became that way the more they practiced them.
I recently read Linchpin, Delivering Happiness, Drive, and Switch. Do you have any other book suggestions? Wow. There's a ton of great books out there. I guess, though, that, as my suggestion would be to get a copy of the Baldrige Criteria, which is not very large, and simply read through it and pay attention to the core values and concepts of that model, which inform the more specific questions. And I think what you'll find is the thing I like about that book is it asks a bunch of questions. It doesn't give you prescriptive answers that may or may not fit your organization and your culture. It asks you questions, and it forces you to reflect on, okay, how do we do this? And do we do this? And if we do, what's our approach to this? So it's a great set of questions. It's a small criteria book that's incredibly valuable, and the time it takes for you to think through the questions, if you go through it, it takes a little bit of time, but it's very, I think, rewarding experience. So that's where I start. Do you still feel that the formula for change has a place in today's business environment?
So I'm not sure specifically which formula for change we're talking about. Clearly, change seems to be required in most industries that I'm familiar with these days, simply because the external environment continues to change, and it seems to be continuing to change at even a rapid pace. It seems to be exponential. And we now even have multiple generations in the workforce. So it's not getting any easier to run high-performing organizations. So they're almost always having to change just to keep up, and certainly having to change to lead in the areas of the industry. And so I do think that formulas for change are applicable. Some are better than others, and some seem to be more effective than others.
I think we have time for one more question. How long does it usually take before the culture starts to change?
Well, I think there's two dimensions. I mean, the culture can start to change relatively quickly, begin to change. But to fully change the culture, for people to change and learn and start behaving differently, having, different values, actually takes quite a few years. And what we've noticed from studying ones that were successful and ones that were not so successful is that some of the ones that weren't successful, they changed their systems rather quickly in a few years, and they changed and had some great leaders, but they never got it really embedded in the culture. And so when those leaders left, the pressure was off, the tension was off of communicating and reinforcing it, and consequently they started going back to their old way. So organizations, they are like people, they have muscle memory, so to speak, and you change them, it takes a while for that change to become embedded, and usually several years for the culture to fully change. But every culture is a little bit different. Some cultures start out being fairly rigid and static, and those are tougher to change and get moving. Some cultures have change kind of embedded in them, and they're very agile. Those cultures are able to change quicker. So it depends upon what the current state of the culture is when you begin the journey, and how long you work at it, as to how long it takes to actually accomplish it. But years is the answer, several years.
Okay, thank you, John, and thank you, Laura, for teeing up those questions. I'd like to take a couple minutes here and tell you about a new program that we're really excited about. It was put together by CPEX and by John at the Montfort Institute and his team, and it's something that's really starting to take off. It may be of great interest to many of you on the phone today. Now, you've probably heard of new technology incubators that are there to help entrepreneurs get their new product concepts out of the lab and into the market. These incubators do things like they provide support, like facilities and HR and marketing and legal, fundraising, things like that. And they also tend to work with a number of different startups at the same time, which creates a very collaborative experience. Well, we borrowed from the same idea, but we're applying it to help incubate excellence. Using the concepts that John has presented here, this approach, this incubator, can dramatically shorten the time it normally takes to create this transformation. As John has said, this is something that can take years. Well, it takes even longer because there's generally a lot of missteps that people are kind of finding their way. So the idea behind this is we got together and we said, well, how can we accelerate this? How can we put together the elements like an incubator that's going to help make everything go faster, easier, and then eventually lead to greater sustainability? Now, why do we do this? Well, as you all know, and you're all on this line, you understand that taking these systematic approaches to performance excellence really affects the bottom line. As you know, a number of studies have shown that organizations that actually put these principles in place typically double their performance compared with their competition. And, twice the revenue, twice the profit, double the rate that new jobs are created, all the right kinds of things you want to see from an organization. So at the end of the day, this incubator is about really making transformation faster, easier, sustainable, and get dramatically much better results in shorter time. So this incubator that we've put together is actually a 3-phase process, and the first phase of this is the architect phase. It provides kind of the core foundation that every organization needs. The builder phase addresses targeting improvements. Every organization is different, as you heard from John. It depends upon their context. Some organizations need to work in some areas and some in others. And then the last stage is the steward phase, which is all about sustaining and extending the gains as that organization continues to go forward. A couple of notes here about what's in the incubator itself, some of the features and benefits. There's training specifically for CEOs and executive directors. As John pointed out, it's critically important to have CEOs and executive directors, senior leaders fully engaged in the process. They need to know what to do, how to lead this. Transformation without that full engagement and that full understanding is a whole lot harder to accomplish, and you tend to lose a lot of momentum right out of the gate. So we have this wonderful transformation leadership training for folks that are in the hot seat and trying to make changes occur here. We also have a number of development workshops where the CEOs and executive directors and their senior team members all collaborate to design and implement specific improvements to their management system. They probably already have some things that work, but this is a way to really take those elements to the next level. And what's great about this is with the help of the Montfort Institute, the team really rolls up their sleeves, they get engaged, they get excited about what they're doing, and they put in place all the elements that are going to help them be more successful personally and professionally. Now, along the way, senior leaders, CEOs, and executive directors work with their peers in a very collaborative fashion. We have a program that we call LeaderLink, which connects CEOs to other CEOs that have kind of been there and done that. They've dealt with these same issues, and they can share that knowledge that they've acquired along the way, and they have immediate credibility. They may be in a different business or different sector, but they face down these same issues, and they're a wonderful resource on that. We're also building a terrific web resource that provides everything that's needed, much like that incubator idea, to support what organizations need along the way. There's a great, robust knowledge base. We have a directory of local resources that can help with specific issues along the way, and we also have some tremendous interaction tools with the other participants that are in that program at that same time. Now, CPACS is known for giving organizations very high-quality, actionable feedback that helps them measure their progress and plan their next steps. And as part of this program, we also do all that and also help prepare organizations who may want to compete for state and national awards like Baldrige if organizations are looking to do that as well. And probably the best thing about this program is the cost. We've put this whole program together in such a way to make it really affordable. We have an introductory price of $1,000 per month for everything that I'm talking about, and if you've done any work in this area, you work with consultants, you know that is a real bargain. A little bit about some of the details of these phases as we drill down into these things. The first phase that John talked about, that foundation phase, the architect phase, it consists of 6 very brief, focused workshops. These are these core workshops, and these are also combined with offline work. CEOs go through some of this themselves, and then they also can bring other members of their senior staff to participate in other modules. And at the end of the first phase, we do a quick checkup from the neck up on how progress is going. We do an online assessment there, and that's a good planning tool for the next phase. The builder phase is the next major block here, and in this one, organizations choose specific workshops or they tack local experts to go after individual opportunities for improvement in their organization. They can do things like, gee, we need to do some work on strategic planning, or we need to learn more about process management, whatever those kinds of things that they really want to address that's going to help their organization. Once again, you have the online resources, the LeaderLink, connection to fellow CEOs, and then also a progress assessment at that phase. And then the last phase is the steward phase. This is where organizations really are doing fine-tuning of their performance. There's, at this level, much more advanced assessments that match the level of development and maturity that organization has. And as an examiner myself, when you have to dig a little bit deeper to find opportunities for improvement, it makes you happy because that's just how we like it. That organizations are performing at a very high level, and we have to dig much harder to find something to tell them. At this phase, we also look to create opportunities for those organizations that are more advanced to maybe help along some of those organizations that are just getting started, just getting out of the blocks. We're a community organization, we're a community resource, And like many of you, we place a lot of value on giving something back to the community, and this is an opportunity for organizations to do that in a kind of a new way. So we think this new product is perfect for small to mid-sized organizations, really in all sectors. The principles are universal. Smaller organizations typically don't have the money or the internal organizational development staff or expertise that you would normally find in larger organizations. In case in point, for a number of years I worked at HP, and at the time they had an incredible corporate development group, corporate quality resources there as well. And at the time I was there, arguably they were among the best in the world. But, HP is also, at the time, was a $40 billion company, so they certainly had, the resources to afford the very best and to really have great internal resources for this. But at the end of the day, what we're trying to do with this incubator is that we're providing this same caliber of knowledge and resources and direction for a small to mid-sized organization in our own backyard that would never have access to this. And we packaged it in such a way to really make it work and to really cut the time it takes to be successful. So that's kind of it from a word from your sponsor here. I would point out that our first cohort is launching in the fall. We have here's our contact information here as well. We've got really good traction on this program. If any of you are interested in something like this, we'd love to talk to you. If any of you know other organizations that you think can benefit from this, we'd also like to talk to you. The referral network is great, but it's a wonderful program. John, as you've heard, does an amazing job with this, and we're real excited to get it going. So with that, Laura, did we have any other questions that may have come in?
We did. My time is at a premium. How much time does it take to go through the PEI program?
Oh, that's a good question. In the first phase of this, and John, I'll ask you to comment on this as well, but in the first phase we have these 6 workshops that are face-to-face, and they're very brief and they're very focused. And then there's a structure for offline work. So it actually is designed not to be a huge burden. We do understand and respect the time that senior executives have. It's extremely limited. But by the same time, I mean, if you're going to invest in this, you want to make sure your time is invested appropriately. So, John, do you have any other comments to add to that?
Well, just that it is an investment of time, I think, is the emphasis that these leaders that did this, they had to carve out time that they usually spent running the business and had to carve some of that out and set it aside for changing the business. And they did this on a continuing basis. This particular, the first year, 6 one-day workshops in person where they actually work on and begin working on the systematic approaches for their organization, to fit their organization. And then it's to work with your senior team to further develop the approach to each item and each of the 9 approaches and further start implementing those. And we provide online or offline support to do that and coaching and feedback along the way. And then they come back for another workshop and do the same thing. So that's roughly the time involved for the whole year to do that through 6 workshops.
Another quick question is, I'm working with an executive coach right now, and does this program replace that relationship?
I would say that it is not in place of, it may be in addition to. And John, again, you could probably pick up on this as well. I think that the leadership attitudes and behaviors are certainly an area that an executive coach is wonderful for. But as John also pointed out, a lot of success here is the science of putting together an aligned and integrated management system that drives the results. So in a sense, it's not a replacement for, it may be in addition to. Both are really effective and helpful in helping an organization achieve a higher level of performance.
And I think we have time for one more question, and that is, can I bring members of my staff along with me?
Yeah, absolutely. The pricing is structured for, we assume, 1. If you do want to add other folks to the program, then there's actually a reduced cost for additional people that would participate in the modules. But we do have a structure for 1. We know a lot of smaller organizations, there may be the senior leader, and he or she may have a designate that they want to bring along as well, maybe a program manager while they manage the strategic stuff. It's entirely possible they would want to bring a resource that would help manage the process, or maybe some other key members of their team to participate as well.
I think that's all the questions we have at this point.
Okay. John, any last comments?
Oh, just thank you for your time, and I hope you found the research and the models and the incubator useful.
That's a great summary, and I'll add my thanks, and thanks to you, Laura, for your help in the logistics and preparing the questions that came in. Once again, just wrapping up, I will be following up with all of you that participated on the call today. I'll be sending to you an email with the slides from John and some other information. Again, thanks very much for your time and tuning in today, and we look forward to talking to you again in the future. Thank you.